You did everything right. You stayed faithful. You prayed, read the word, went to church. You led your family, showed up to work, kept it together when everything inside felt like it was quietly falling apart. But no matter how much you do, you still feel it, like God is distant, like your prayers hit the ceiling. You're trying to live by faith, but you don't hear Him. And that silence, it's loud, especially when no one else sees it. You start to wonder, maybe the problem is me. Maybe I'm not spiritual enough. Maybe I'm just not listening well enough. But deep down, you know that's not it. You're not chasing an emotional experience. You just want something real. You want to know if God still speaks, and if so, how to hear His voice when life feels like a storm, and silence is the only thing that answers back. Most men won't say it out loud, but they feel it. Disoriented, unsure, disconnected. We've been trained to fix things, to move fast, to keep going. But maybe hearing God isn't about doing more. Maybe it's about slowing down enough to notice what we've been tuning out. Maybe it's not a lack of faith. Maybe it's just too much noise. We ask for clarity, but we're too full of motion to catch the whisper. You've probably heard the steps before. Quiet time, read scripture, wait for confirmation. And yes, they matter. But this isn't about checking spiritual boxes. It's about what happens when you've done all of that and God still feels silent. It's about learning how to discern God's voice, not in ideal conditions, but in your real, messy, everyday life. Maybe you've already begged for direction. Maybe you've asked 100 times, but the answer never came how you expected. Maybe the guidance is already there, not loud, not traumatic, just buried under the pressure, the pride, and the pace. Maybe God hasn't gone silent. Maybe we've just forgotten how to hear. And now, you're tired of pretending. You want truth, you want presence. You want to hear Him again. No more formulas, no more fixing. Just this moment, a quiet seat at the table, and maybe the beginning of something real. Sometimes, hearing God doesn't look spiritual at all. It looks like walking through your front door after a long day and realizing you haven't been mentally present for hours. You've made decisions, led meetings, replied to everyone, but never once stopped to ask God what He thought. Not because you don't care, but because you've been surviving on instinct. That's how distance becomes normal, quietly, without meaning to. Most men won't say they feel disconnected from God. They'll say they're busy, overwhelmed, just figuring it out. But underneath, it's usually something deeper. Shame they've never named, pride they've never dropped, or just a deep fatigue that never goes away. It's easier to stay in motion than to sit still long enough to feel the disconnect. But when you stop, really stop, you start to see what's actually been running your life. Jesus said, "My sheep hear my voice and they follow me." Not admire, not believe from a distance, follow. That means His voice is direction, not just inspiration. But direction only matters if you're willing to slow down and receive it. Most of us move first, then ask God to bless it. But that's not how hearing God works. It happens when we ask before we act, when we surrender speed in exchange for alignment. And sometimes God's voice shows up in the very places we resist. A door that won't open, a plan that keeps falling apart, a peace that never settles in. We don't call that His voice because it doesn't sound like what we wanted. But wisdom starts when you stop fighting the closed doors and start asking, "God, are you redirecting me?" That one question could change everything. For some men, it's not noise that's blocking God's voice, it's guilt. A failure they've never faced, a moment they still regret. And that guilt keeps their faith shallow. They read scripture but avoid intimacy. They pray but keep a safe distance. But the cross didn't just pay for your sin, it cleared the way for you to hear Him again. Not because you earned it, but because He still wants to walk with you. Guilt whispers, "You're not worthy." God says, "Come." One of the greatest lies men believe is that they need to clean up before coming back to God. But Jesus never said that. He said, "Come to me, all who are weary." If you've been drifting, performing, hiding, pretending, this might be the moment to call it out. Not to fix it, just to stop faking. Because in that moment of honesty, the silence breaks and the presence gets closer. Start by noticing the habits that keep you spiritually deaf. Not just sin, distraction, the endless scroll, the packed schedule, the mornings where you start fast and never pause. These aren't just habits, they're noise. You can't live aligned with Christ if you never give Him space to speak. It's not about having more quiet time. It's about building awareness, pausing, checking in before you push through. That's where the voice returns. This isn't about feeling spiritual. It's about walking different, living like the relationship is real because it is. And maybe all it takes to hear him again is one honest breath, one pause that says, "I'm done leading alone." That's where it begins. Sometimes the most spiritual thing a man can do is stop pretending everything's fine. Not to collapse, not to make excuses, but to finally say the honest thing. I don't hear God clearly, and I want to. That's not weakness, that's clarity. And clarity is where hearing begins. You weren't made to guess your way through life. You were made to walk in step with him. If you're waiting for a sign in the sky, you'll miss the voice in the quiet. God rarely shouts. He waits for the man who slows down. That's hard for us. We fix, we push, we move. But maybe that's the very thing blocking us. You can't hear a whisper when your life is loud. And maybe that's why you're here, because something in you already knows the noise isn't working. So start here, before your next meeting, before the scroll. 2 minutes in silence. Not to feel something, not to perform. Just to say, God, I'm here. Speak if you want. I'm listening. That pause, quiet, honest, undramatic, will become an anchor. You don't need more answers. You need presence. And presence begins with showing up. Second, pick one decision today, big or small, and ask, God, what do you think? Don't force an answer. Don't wait for a sign. Just ask. That act of surrender is space-making. It may lead to a pause, a delay, a different tone. That's what alignment is. Not spiritual technique, but learning to check in with the one who already knows the way. Third, clear one physical corner of your life. Your desk, your nightstand, the seat of your truck. Reset it, not as a productivity trick, but as a marker, a quiet reminder that this life, your life, is being led. That space becomes a trigger, not for noise, for pause. That's how men of God live, not louder, but more deliberate. I remember a season where everything looked fine on the outside, income steady, family intact, but inside I was numb. I'd pray, but it felt like a locked door. One night I sat in my truck, engine off, garage dark, and whispered, God, I miss you. No answer, no signs, but for the first time in a long while, the silence wasn't empty, it was shared. If you've been in that space, showing up for everyone but unsure how to hear for yourself, you're not alone, you're not broken, you're just overdue for honesty. Christ isn't waiting for a performance, he's not grading your faith, he's simply waiting to walk with you again. Not from a pulpit, from the inside out. You don't need to chase spiritual feelings. You need spiritual footing, a rhythm, a posture of asking, a life that checks in, not just checks boxes. If this gave you even one place to start, you're already moving. Not because you got stronger, but because you stopped pretending, and that's where the hearing begins. This space, this channel, is for men like us, not for the polished, but for the present, for men who want to live with clarity, lead with wisdom, and walk with Christ in the middle of real life. If that's what you've been craving, stay close. This isn't just a video, it's a seat at the table, and you don't have to walk this alone. May God bless you deeply, and may you walk awake with Christ at the center.